The stars were dying faster than anyone had predicted. Dr. Marcus Webb stood before the massive display screen in the United Nations Space Research Center, his coffee growing cold in his hands as he watched the data scroll past. Red warnings flashed across every sector of the mapped universe, each one representing another star system entering its death spiral decades or even centuries ahead of schedule. "The Andromeda readings came in 3 hours ago," said Dr. Yuki Tanaka, his research partner of 15 years. She pulled up a new set of graphs that made Marcus feel sick to his stomach. "It's accelerating. Whatever is causing this, it's not slowing down." Marcus set down his coffee and walked closer to the screen. The universe was only 14 billion years old. It should have had trillions of years left before the heat death that scientists had always known would come eventually. But something had changed. Something was draining the cosmic energy that held everything together, and nobody knew what it was or how to stop it. The door behind them opened, and General Patricia Hayes walked in with 3 men in expensive suits. Marcus recognized them from news broadcasts. They were representatives from the Global Science Initiative, the international body that funded deep space research. Their presence meant either very good news or very bad news, and given the circumstances, Marcus suspected the latter. "Dr. Webb, Dr. Tanaka," General Hayes said, "these gentlemen have something they need to share with you. I suggest you sit down." The lead representative, a gray-haired man named Director Chen, cleared his throat. "6 months ago, our deep space probes made contact with an alien civilization in the Kepler 442 system. We've been in communication with them since." Marcus felt his legs go weak. First contact with alien life had been humanity's dream for centuries. Under normal circumstances, this would be the greatest moment in human history. But the look on Director Chen's faces told him this was not a celebration. "They call themselves the Velthari," Director Chen continued. "They're part of a galactic community of over 200 intelligent species, and they reached out to us because they're dying. They're all dying." Dr. Tanaka leaned forward. "The stellar decay, they know about it." "They've known about it for 3,000 years, Director Chen said. "They call it the unraveling. The fabric of the universe is coming apart at the seams, and the cosmic energy that powers everything, stars, planets, life itself, is bleeding away into nothing. Their best scientists estimate that total universal collapse will occur within 800 years. Marcus felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. 800 years. It sounded like a long time, but in cosmic terms it was barely a heartbeat. Every civilization in the galaxy, every planet, every form of life that had ever existed or would ever exist, all of it would be gone. "Why contact us?" he asked. "We're a young species. We've barely begun exploring our own solar system. What could we possibly offer them?" Director Chen exchanged a glance with General Hayes before answering. "The Velthari have been studying Earth for centuries. They've watched humanity develop from primitive societies to a spacefaring civilization in what they consider an impossibly short time. They believe that humans think differently than other species, that we approach problems from angles that other races never consider. They're desperate," General Hayes added. 200 civilizations have been working on this problem for 3,000 years, and they've made no progress. They're hoping that a fresh perspective might see something they've missed." Over the next several weeks, Marcus and Yuki were introduced to the vast network of alien scientists who had dedicated their lives to solving the unraveling. The Velthari were tall, slender beings with luminous skin and eyes that reflected light like polished opals. They communicated through a combination of speech and subtle color changes in their skin, and their technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic to human eyes. The leader of the Velthari Scientific Council was named Sovereign Researcher Kelvar. He was ancient by their standards, having lived for over 600 years, and he had spent the last 4 centuries studying the unraveling. When he first met Marcus and Yuki through a quantum communication link, His skin flickered with colors that the translation software identified as cautious hope mixed with deep exhaustion. "We welcome humanity to the galactic community," Kelvar said, his voice rendered in slightly mechanical English by the translator. "Though I wish the circumstances were different. I have read the reports on your species. You are young, but you have accomplished much in your brief existence." "We're honored to help in any way we can," Marcus replied. "But I have to be honest, we don't even fully understand how the universe works yet. How can we solve a problem that has stumped civilizations far more advanced than our own?" Kelvar's skin shifted to a deep blue that the translator indicated was thoughtful contemplation. "Perhaps that is precisely why you might succeed. We have studied the cosmos for millennia. We know its laws, its patterns, its limitations. You know none of these things. Where we see walls, you might see doors." The alien scientist shared everything his people had learned about the unraveling. The universe was held together by something the Velthari called the cosmic lattice, an invisible web of energy that connected every particle to every other particle. This lattice was what allowed stars to burn, planets to form, and life to exist. But something had damaged the lattice, creating a wound that was slowly growing larger. Energy was leaking out of the universe like water through a crack in a dam. The Velthari had traced the wound to a specific point in space, a region near the center of the galaxy where the lattice was completely torn. They had sent hundreds of expeditions to study it, but none had been able to determine its cause or find a way to repair it. "We have tried everything," Kelvar said. "We have bombarded the wound with every form of energy we can generate. We have attempted to weave new lattice threads to close the gap. We have even tried to create artificial barriers to slow the bleeding. Nothing works. The wound continues to grow." Marcus spent sleepless nights studying the data the Velthari had provided. The science was far beyond anything humanity had developed, but the underlying concepts were understandable. Energy, matter, force, these were universal constants that worked the same way whether you were human or alien. What struck Marcus most was how all 200 civilizations had approached the problem in essentially the same way. They had treated the unraveling as a disease to be cured, a malfunction to be repaired. They had thrown increasingly powerful technologies at it, trying to force the universe to heal itself. But what if they were thinking about it wrong? Marcus sat up in bed one night, an idea forming in his mind. He had studied the history of human science extensively, and he knew that many of humanity's greatest breakthroughs had come from questioning basic assumptions. The Earth was not the center of the universe. Matter and energy were the same thing. Time was not constant. What if the unraveling was not a disease at all? What if it was something else entirely? He called Yuki immediately, not caring that it was 3 in the morning. "I need you to look at something," he said. "I think I might have found something everyone else missed." The discovery that would change the fate of the universe had just begun to take shape. Marcus and Yuki spent the next 3 weeks locked in their laboratory, running simulations and cross-referencing data from every source they could access. The Velthari had provided them with computing power beyond anything Earth possessed, quantum processors that could calculate in seconds what would take human computers centuries to solve. What Marcus had noticed was a pattern in the unraveling that no one else had paid attention to. The wound in the cosmic lattice was not simply bleeding energy out of the universe. It was transforming it. The energy that leaked through the wound emerged on the other side as something different, something that the Velthari instruments could not properly measure because it did not obey the normal laws of physics. "It's not a wound," Marcus explained to Yuki as they reviewed their findings. "It's a transition point. The universe is not dying, it's trying to evolve." Yuki stared at the data on her screen, her brilliant mind racing to keep up with the implications. "You're saying the cosmic lattice is intentionally reconfiguring itself, that this is supposed to happen?" "Not exactly," Marcus said. "Think about it like this. Every system in nature seeks equilibrium. Water flows downhill. Heat spreads from hot to cold. What if the universe is doing the same thing on a cosmic scale? What if the energy that makes up reality is trying to reach a new, more stable state? The problem, as Marcus saw it, was that the transition was happening too quickly. Under natural circumstances, the universe might have had billions of years to gradually shift from one state to another. But something had accelerated the process, turning a slow evolution into a rapid collapse. The Velthari have been fighting the transition, Marcus continued. Every attempt they've made to close the wound has actually made things worse. They've been treating the symptoms while ignoring the underlying cause. Yuki's eyes widened as she grasped what Marcus was suggesting. If they had just left it alone, the universe would have had time to adapt. But by trying to fix it, they destabilized the whole system. Exactly. And now the only way to save the universe is not to close the wound, but to complete the transition safely. We need to help the universe evolve into its new state before it tears itself apart. The challenge was enormous. No technology existed that could control a process operating on such a vast scale. The Velthari and their allies had spent millennia developing tools to fight the unraveling, not to guide it. Everything would have to be invented from scratch. Marcus reached out to Kelvar and presented his theory. The ancient alien listened without interruption, his skin cycling through colors too complex for the translator to fully interpret. When Marcus finished, there was a long silence. "You are suggesting that we have made the problem worse," Kelvar finally said. "That 3,000 years of effort have accelerated our own destruction." "I'm suggesting that you were working with incomplete information," Marcus replied carefully. "Your approach was logical given what you knew, but humans have a saying. Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. You were so focused on the wound that you didn't notice what the wound was actually doing." Kelvar's skin settled into a pale silver that the translator identified as deep contemplation mixed with something like wonder. "In 600 years of life, I have never considered this possibility. The wound appeared, and we assumed it was harmful. We never stopped to ask whether it might serve a purpose." The sovereign researcher called an emergency meeting of the Galactic Science Council, inviting representatives from all 200 civilizations to hear Marcus's theory. The gathering took place in a massive virtual space created by Velthari technology, allowing beings from across the galaxy to interact as if they were in the same room. Marcus had never felt so small. Around him stood creatures of every imaginable shape and size. There were beings made of crystalline structures that sang instead of speaking, gas-based entities that floated like living clouds, and insectoid races with dozens of limbs and compound eyes that saw in spectrums humans could not perceive. All of them were watching him, waiting for the young human scientist to explain how he had solved a puzzle that had confounded the greatest minds in the galaxy. He took a deep breath and began to speak. The reaction to his presentation was mixed. Some species dismissed his theory immediately, arguing that it was too simple to be correct. Others were intrigued but skeptical, pointing out that humanity had no practical experience with cosmic-scale phenomena. A few were openly hostile, suggesting that the young race was overstepping its bounds by contradicting millennia of established research. But there were also those who listened with open minds. The crystalline harmonics, a species that perceived reality primarily through vibrations and resonance, were particularly interested. Their lead researcher, a being whose name translated roughly as Melody of Understanding, asked Marcus to explain his theory in terms of energy patterns rather than physical structures. When he did, the crystalline harmonics produced a sound that their translator rendered as excited agreement. "The young one speaks truth," Melody of Understanding said. "We have felt the dissonance in the cosmic lattice but did not understand its meaning. It is not discord, it is modulation. The universe is changing its frequency." This endorsement from one of the galaxy's most respected scientific civilizations shifted the mood of the council. Other species began asking questions, requesting additional data, proposing experiments to test Marcus's theory. What had started as skepticism slowly transformed into cautious hope. Kelvar raised his hand for silence. We have debated theories before and they have led nowhere. What we need now is proof. Dr. Webb, can your hypothesis be tested? Marcus nodded. Yes, but it will require resources that humanity alone cannot provide. We need to build something that has never been built before. A device that can measure and interact with the transitional energy on the other side of the wound. If my theory is correct, we should be able to detect a new form of cosmic energy that the universe is evolving toward. The Galactic Science Council voted to provide whatever resources Marcus needed. Ships, scientists, technology, raw materials, everything the combined civilizations of the galaxy could offer was placed at his disposal. For the first time in 3,000 years, the races of the cosmos had something they had almost forgotten how to feel. They had hope. Construction of the device began immediately. It would be built in space near the wound itself, a location so dangerous that dozens of previous expeditions had been lost to the chaotic energy fluctuations. Human engineers worked alongside Velthari technologists, crystalline harmonics, and representatives from dozens of other species, each contributing their unique knowledge and abilities. Yuki led the Earth-based team, coordinating with researchers across the planet who were developing new theories and technologies to support the project. What had been a simple research partnership between two scientists had become a species-wide effort, with universities, governments, and private organizations all contributing to the cause. Marcus traveled to the construction site aboard a Velthari ship, his first journey beyond Earth's solar system. He watched through the viewport as familiar stars gave way to unfamiliar constellations, and then to regions of space that no human eyes had ever seen. The journey took only days thanks to faster-than-light technology, but it felt like crossing into a different world. When they arrived at the wound, Marcus understood why the Velthari had described it with such fear. It was not a hole in the traditional sense, but rather a distortion, a place where space itself seemed to bend and twist in impossible ways. Light behaved strangely near it, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly, and at its center was something that Marcus could only describe as a shimmer, a boundary between what was and what would be. "Beautiful, is it not?" Kelvar said, standing beside Marcus at the viewport. "In all my centuries of studying it, I never saw it as anything but a threat. But now, through your eyes, I see something different. I see potential." Marcus nodded slowly. "If we're right, that shimmer is the doorway to the next phase of cosmic existence. Everything on this side is the universe as we know it. Everything on the other side is what the universe is becoming. And if we're wrong, then we've lost nothing but time. But if we're right, we have a chance to save everything that has ever existed." The device they were building was unlike anything the galaxy had ever created. It combined human creativity with Velthari precision, crystalline harmonic resonance technology, with the energy manipulation abilities of species that had evolved to interface directly with cosmic forces. It was a collaboration on a scale that had never been attempted before. And more than once, the project nearly fell apart due to disagreements, misunderstandings, or simple exhaustion. But always, they found a way to continue. Marcus learned that the key to working with alien civilizations was not to erase differences, but to embrace them. Each species brought something unique to the project, and the combination of their perspectives created solutions that none of them could have achieved alone. Months passed. The device grew larger and more complex, and slowly the people working on it began to believe that it might actually work. The day of the first test arrived with a sense of anticipation that spread across the entire galaxy. Beings on thousands of worlds held their breath as Marcus activated the device, sending a carefully calibrated pulse of energy through the wound and into the unknown space beyond. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the sensors began to sing. What they detected was exactly what Marcus had predicted. On the other side of the wound was a new form of cosmic energy, denser and more stable than anything that existed in the current universe. It was not chaos. It was potential. The universe was not dying. It was preparing to be reborn. "We were wrong," Kelvar said, his voice hushed with wonder. "For 3,000 years we were wrong, and a species that has been among the stars for less than a century showed us the truth." The celebration that followed was brief. There was still an enormous amount of work to be done. Proving that the transition was natural was only the first step. Now they had to figure out how to guide it safely, how to prevent the accelerated collapse while allowing the universe to evolve at its own pace. But for the first time since the unraveling began, the galaxy had a path forward. And at the center of that path were the humans, the young, impetuous, impossibly creative species that had looked at an impossible problem and asked the one question no one else had thought to ask. What if we're thinking about this all wrong? The work of guiding the universal transition proved to be even more complex than Marcus had imagined. It was not enough to simply stop fighting the unraveling. The damage done by millennia of well-intentioned intervention had created instabilities throughout the cosmic lattice. If left unchecked, these instabilities would cause the transition to happen unevenly, with some regions of space evolving while others collapsed into nothing. The solution required a new kind of technology, one that could distribute the transitional energy evenly across the entire universe. Marcus called it the Lattice Harmonizer, a network of devices that would work together to smooth out the rough edges of cosmic evolution. Each device would need to be precisely calibrated to its local region of space, and thousands of them would need to be deployed across the galaxy and beyond. It was a project that would take generations to complete, but for the first time, the civilizations of the galaxy were working together toward a common goal. Old rivalries were set aside. Ancient conflicts were forgotten. In the face of universal extinction, the differences that had divided species for millennia suddenly seemed trivial. Humanity played a central role in this new era of cooperation. Human scientists, engineers, and diplomats traveled to distant star systems, sharing their unique perspective with races that had been studying the cosmos for millennia. What humans lacked in experience, they made up for in creativity and adaptability. They asked questions that other species had never thought to ask. They proposed solutions that seemed impossible until someone tried them. Marcus found himself becoming something of a celebrity across the galaxy. His name was spoken in languages he could not pronounce, and his face was recognized on worlds he had never visited. But he tried not to let the attention distract him from the work that still needed to be done. He was not alone in this effort. Yuki had become the head of the Earth-based research team, coordinating the work of thousands of scientists who were developing new technologies to support the Harmonizer project. General Hayes had been appointed to lead the military forces, protecting the construction sites from pirates and hostile entities who sought to profit from the chaos. And Director Chen had become the primary liaison between Earth and the Galactic Council, navigating the complex politics of interstellar diplomacy. The first Harmonizer device was completed 2 years after Marcus's initial discovery. It was installed near the original wound, designed to stabilize the region where the damage to the cosmic lattice was most severe. When it was activated, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The chaotic fluctuations that had made the area so dangerous suddenly smoothed out, replaced by a steady pulse of energy that matched the rhythm of the transitional state. "It works," Kelvar said, watching the readings with the closest thing to joy that Velthari physiology could express. "By the stars above and below, it actually works." More devices were built and deployed. Each one required years of work and the cooperation of multiple species, but the results were undeniable. The accelerated collapse was slowing. The universe was being given time to evolve naturally. And as the network of harmonizers grew, new possibilities began to emerge. The transitional energy on the other side of the wound was not just stable, it was useful. Researchers discovered that it could be channeled and directed, used to power technologies that had previously been thought impossible. Faster-than-light travel became more efficient. Communication across vast distances became instantaneous. Energy production that had once required massive infrastructure could now be accomplished with small, portable devices. It was as if the universe itself was rewarding them for helping it evolve. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. Some species had built their entire civilizations around the scarcity of energy. When that scarcity disappeared, their power and influence went with it. Others were simply resistant to change, preferring the familiar universe they had known to the unknown one that was emerging. A faction calling itself the Preservers formed, dedicated to stopping the transition and restoring the universe to its original state. They believed that the natural order was being corrupted, that the evolution Marcus had identified was actually a corruption introduced by some malevolent force. They attacked harmonizer stations, assassinated scientists, and spread propaganda designed to undermine the galactic cooperation that had made the project possible. Marcus was targeted multiple times. He survived only because of the security measures that had been put in place to protect key personnel. But each attack reminded him that saving the universe was not just a scientific challenge. It was also a political one. He traveled to the homeworld of the Preservers' most influential supporter, a species called the Urkai who had dominated galactic politics for thousands of years. The Urkai were massive beings, standing 3 meters tall with 4 powerful arms and heads that resembled Earth's now extinct dinosaurs. They had built their empire on their control of energy resources, and the new transitional energy threatened everything they had worked to achieve. The Urkai High Council agreed to meet with Marcus, though the translator software indicated that their mood was hostile skepticism bordering on contempt. The council chamber was designed to intimidate, with Marcus standing alone on a platform while the council members loomed above him on elevated seats. "You come to our world seeking what?" the lead council member asked. "Do you expect us to abandon our beliefs because a primitive species claims to understand the cosmos better than those who have studied it for millennia?" Marcus took a deep breath, remembering everything he had learned about diplomacy and cultural sensitivity. "I come seeking understanding," he said. "The universe is changing whether we want it to or not. We can fight that change and die, or we can guide it and survive. I know what choice I want to make. I'm here to ask what choice you want to make." The council members conferred among themselves in their own language, their translator intentionally disabled to keep Marcus from understanding. When they finished, the lead council member leaned forward, his massive head casting a shadow over Marcus's small platform. "You speak of survival, but you ignore what survival means. We have survived for 50,000 years by being strong, by controlling what we need, by taking what others would not give. This is the way of the universe. The strong survive, the weak perish. What you propose would change this. It would make everyone equal. Where would be the glory in that?" "The glory would be in still existing," Marcus replied. "In 1,000,000,000,000 years, when the transition is complete and the universe has evolved into something we can barely imagine, your descendants would still be there. They would look back at this moment and know that their ancestors chose to be part of something greater than themselves. That seems like a glory worth having." The council member was silent for a long moment. Then he made a sound that the translator identified as grudging acknowledgement. "You have courage, little human. Misguided courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. We will consider your words, but do not mistake consideration for agreement." Marcus left the Urkai homeworld knowing that he had not convinced them, but he had planted a seed. Sometimes that was all you could do. The years passed, and the harmonizer network continued to grow. Marcus watched as humanity took its place among the great civilizations of the galaxy, no longer the newcomers but respected partners in the work of cosmic salvation. Human settlements spread across dozens of worlds. Human art, music, and literature became popular across the galaxy, offering fresh perspectives to species that had grown tired of their own cultural traditions. And slowly, gradually, the preservers lost influence. The Urkai, faced with economic collapse as their energy monopoly crumbled, eventually chose to join the cooperation rather than continue their resistance. Other species followed, swayed by the undeniable benefits of the new transitional energy and the fear of being left behind as the universe evolved. Marcus grew old. His hair turned gray, then white. His joints ached and his eyes grew dim. But he continued to work, continued to push for the completion of the project that had become his life's purpose. On his 80th birthday, he received a message from Kelvar, who was now over 700 years old and nearing the end of even a Velthari's extended lifespan. The message was simple. Thank you, my friend. Because of you, everything that exists has a future. That is a legacy worthy of any being, regardless of species. Marcus smiled as he read the message. He was sitting in his home on Earth, looking out at the stars that he had spent his life trying to save. Somewhere out there, the Harmonizer network was humming along, guiding the universe toward its next phase of existence. The transition would take millions of years to complete, but it would complete. The cosmos would survive. And it had all started with a simple question. What if we're thinking about this all wrong? 100 years after Marcus Webb's initial discovery, the project to save the universe reached a critical milestone. The Harmonizer network had grown to cover over 60% of the known cosmos, and the effects were becoming visible even to casual observers. Stars that had been dying were stabilizing. Regions of space that had been chaotic and dangerous were becoming calm and navigable. The wound that had once threatened to tear reality apart was slowly closing, not because it was being fought, but because it was no longer needed. The universe was healing itself. Dr. Sarah Webb stood in the memorial garden that had been built on the site of the old United Nations Space Research Center. She was Marcus's great-granddaughter, and she had inherited both his scientific brilliance and his stubborn determination. Now, she led the human delegation to the Galactic Council, a position of honor that would have been unthinkable when her ancestor first proposed his revolutionary theory. Beside her stood Kelvar III, the grandson of the original sovereign researcher who had welcomed humanity to the galactic community. The Velthari tradition of scientific leadership had passed through generations, and Kelvar III had dedicated his life to seeing the Harmonizer project through to completion. It's strange to think about, Sarah said, looking at the holographic memorial that showed images of Marcus and the original research team. They started something that will take millions of years to finish. None of them lived to see it completed. None of us will either. That is the nature of truly great works, Kelvar III replied. They transcend individual lifetimes. Your ancestor understood this. He did not work for personal glory. He worked because it was the right thing to do. Sarah nodded. It was a lesson that humanity had taken to heart. In the century since first contact, humans had spread across the galaxy, but they had done so as partners rather than conquerors. They had learned from the mistakes of other species and tried to avoid repeating them. They had built bridges instead of walls, shared knowledge instead of hoarding it, and treated every civilization they encountered with respect and curiosity. This approach had earned them a reputation that still surprised many of the older galactic species. Humans were seen as the peacemakers, the problem solvers, the ones you called when two civilizations were on the brink of war, or when a scientific problem seemed unsolvable. It was a far cry from the violent, primitive species that the Velthari had first observed when they began studying Earth. Have you seen the latest projections? Kelvar III asked. The transition is accelerating again, but in a good way this time. The universe is responding to the Harmonizer network. It's like it wants to evolve, and we've finally stopped holding it back." Sarah smiled. "My great-grandfather would have loved to see this. He always said the universe was smarter than we were. We just needed to get out of its way and let it do what it wanted to do." The celebration of the centennial milestone was held on a massive space station orbiting the original Wound, which had now shrunk to a fraction of its former size. Representatives from all 200 civilizations attended, along with delegations from dozens of new species that had been discovered in the decades since the project began. The station's viewing galleries offered a spectacular view of the transitional space that was becoming visible as the Wound closed, a shimmer of colors that seemed to promise something wonderful just beyond reach. Sarah gave the keynote address, speaking to an audience of billions across the galaxy. She talked about her great-grandfather's vision, about the courage it had taken for humanity to propose something that contradicted millennia of established research, and about the cooperation that had made the Harmonizer network possible. "We are living in a moment of transformation," she said, "not just for our species or for our civilizations, but for reality itself. The universe is evolving, and we have the privilege of being part of that evolution. We did not cause the change, and we cannot control it, but we can guide it. We can help it happen safely and smoothly. And when it is complete, when the cosmos has finished becoming whatever it is becoming, we will be there to see it." The applause lasted for several minutes. When it finally died down, Sarah turned to look at the shrinking Wound behind her. Through it, she could see the glow of transitional energy, the same energy that now powered ships, communication networks, and countless other technologies across the galaxy. "My great-grandfather asked a simple question," she continued. "What if we're thinking about this all wrong?" That question changed everything. It saved the universe, but it also reminded us of something important. We don't know everything, we never will, and that's okay. Because the universe is full of mysteries, and solving them is what gives life meaning. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for all those who had worked on the project and not lived to see this milestone. Marcus Webb's name was spoken first, followed by Kelvar the Elder, Melody of Understanding of the Crystalline Harmonics, and thousands of others who had given their lives to the cause. After the ceremony, Sarah walked through the station's corridors, accepting congratulations and shaking hands with beings from dozens of different species. She eventually found a quiet observation deck where she could be alone with her thoughts. The view was spectacular. The wounded region of space was almost beautiful now, a swirl of colors and energies that seemed to dance with purpose and intention. Scientists had recently discovered that the transitional energy was not just stable, it was self-organizing. It was forming patterns and structures that suggested it might be capable of supporting entirely new forms of existence. "The universe is not just surviving," Sarah whispered to herself. "It's getting ready for something new." She thought about what that might mean. For billions of years, life in the cosmos had been based on the physics of the current universe, on stars that burned hydrogen, planets that orbited in predictable paths, and matter that followed rules that scientists had spent centuries trying to understand. What would life look like in the evolved universe? What new possibilities would open up when the transition was complete? Nobody knew, but humanity and its allies would be there to find out. The final phase of the Harmonizer project took another 300 years to complete. By the time the last device was installed, humanity had changed in ways that Marcus Webb could never have imagined. They had developed technologies that allowed them to extend their lifespans indefinitely, to travel anywhere in the galaxy in moments, and to experience realities that their ancestors would have considered supernatural. But they had not changed in the ways that mattered most. They were still curious, still creative, still willing to ask questions that others considered foolish or impossible, and still determined to use their unique perspective to help make the universe a better place. The transition was officially declared complete on a day that would be remembered for as long as memory existed. The wound in the cosmic lattice had closed entirely, replaced by a seamless integration of old and new. The evolved universe was now a reality, a cosmos that operated on principles that were still being understood, but that seemed to offer possibilities beyond anything that had come before. Energy was abundant, space was malleable, time was flexible, and life in all its countless forms had access to resources and opportunities that made the scarcity and conflict of the old universe seem like distant nightmares. On Earth, which had been carefully preserved as a memorial to humanity's origins, a celebration was held that attracted beings from across the galaxy. They came to honor the species that had saved the universe, to walk the ground where Marcus Webb had made his historic discovery, and to remember the simple question that had changed everything. At the center of the celebration was a statue that had been erected on the site of the original research center. It depicted Marcus Webb standing with his arm outstretched, pointing toward the stars. At his feet was inscribed the question that had become humanity's motto. What if we're thinking about this all wrong? Representatives from every known civilization spoke at the ceremony, expressing gratitude and admiration for the species that had been members of the galactic community for only 4 centuries, but had already left an indelible mark on cosmic history. The speeches were eloquent and heartfelt, praising human creativity, determination, and willingness to challenge assumptions. But the most moving moment came at the end, when a young human child walked to the front of the assembly. She was only 8 years old, too young to fully understand the significance of the occasion, but old enough to sense that something important was happening. She looked at the crowd of alien beings surrounding her, creatures of every imaginable shape and size, and she smiled with the innocent confidence of youth. "My teacher told me that humans saved the universe," she said, "but I think that's not quite right. I think humans asked the universe what it needed, and then we helped it get what it wanted. That's what my mom says is the best kind of help, the kind where you listen first and act second." The assembly was silent for a moment. Then, starting with the Velthari delegation and spreading outward, a wave of applause began that grew until it seemed to shake the very foundations of the planet. The child bowed awkwardly, not sure what she had said that was so impressive, and ran back to her parents. But her words would be remembered for generations. They captured something essential about humanity, something that had made them uniquely suited to solving a problem that had defeated far older and more advanced civilizations. Humans listened. They questioned. They refused to accept that something was impossible just because everyone said it was. And when they found answers, they shared them freely, without asking for anything in return except the opportunity to keep learning. The universe had evolved. The cosmos had survived. And at the heart of that survival was a species that had learned to approach problems with humility, curiosity, and open minds. In the evolved universe, humanity and its allies flourished. They discovered new forms of life, new principles of physics, new possibilities for existence. They faced new challenges and solved new problems. They made mistakes and learned from them. But they never forgot the lesson that Marcus Webb had taught them all those centuries ago. The universe was vast and complex and full of mysteries. The only way to understand it was to keep asking questions, even when the questions seemed foolish or impossible. Especially when the questions seemed foolish or impossible. Because sometimes, the foolish questions were the ones that saved everything.